Good evening on the air, the program Time. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, on the threshold of the Duma elections, has issued an address to Russian voters. Hello, dear Russians. In one day, on the 17th of December, the elections of the deputies of the State Duma will be held. On the eve of elections, I want to share my thoughts with you. The forthcoming event is not any longer that formal voting which we were taught over the previous decades, when results were known in advance to everyone. This time, these are really elections. I have been carefully following the course of the election campaign. Tens of parties and movements are attempting to be elected to the State Duma, with an enormous number of contenders for each deputy seat. And many of them truly want to help Russia. They have very interesting, serious proposals which could work, ideas of a large countrywide proportion. And yet, at the same time, not everything which is said can be accepted. Unfortunately, some candidates said to the voters that everything is wrong and everything is bad. Elect me, and then the situation will change to the better. All of the problems will be solved. Problems of the army. Plants will begin to operate at full capacity. Every home will have tranquility and sufficiency. Promises, promises, promises. What can one say? Probably that's a natural thing. There always will be people who will want at any cost to get a seat in the Duma, and I have met such people. It's fundamentally simple to promise more and to gain favor. But we know that everything is smooth only on paper. The most dangerous thing is when representatives of certain parties want to return the country to the past. Possibly they sincerely believe that this is the only correct solution. But yet I'm confident that this is a tragic mistake. We followed that path which they want to return us to for more than 70 years, and that was sufficient to make a conclusion. And so what? Did we have a life which was better than in other countries? No. The country couldn't even get close to the standard of living in developed countries, including those countries whose domestic industry was destroyed just as ours in years of war. To dispute that is impossible. Why then today are there so many people who longingly look back? Because that is where our youth was. Love and personal honest labor. The experience of many, many years, several generations, forces us to admit that a plan won't save us, or a strict price regulating system. A command economy never worked well, nor will it ever work. It can't be uplifted even by an order from a general. We won't get out of neediness if, as once before, we ban free land ownership, begin a new repartition of ownership and property. Who will get what after such a bloody repartition? Dear voters, the straining of relations with our neighbors, even for the sake of recreating the former Soviet Union, will end in tragedy. And these were precisely the ideas which were voiced during the pre-election campaign from several representatives of parties and blocs and candidates with whom you are familiar. This is not the light at the end of the tunnel for Russia. Probably it is more the sparks of new and more terrible fires of civil war. Let's contemplate this. Would it be better if we again are divided by strife, anger, and hatred? Will that bring us any benefit? No, and again I say no. What can be more dangerous when, in the midst of a ford, some are pulling forward and others are pulling to the left, others to the right? That has the potential of again turning Russia over. Our country needs no revolutions. Enough of trying to start life from scratch. Russia needs abundance, sufficiency, tranquility, and order. I am aware that Russian voters are favorably affected by those parties and blocs and movements whose positions are moderate, objectives realistic, and means of achieving them are exclusive of extreme measures and adventures. I like such a position. It's only 5 years that we have been trying to learn to live in new conditions, and we have already learned some things, although the learning process takes much toil. Life for now remains difficult. These are difficulties which have been placed as burdens on the shoulders of pensioners, the military, the workers of the defense sector and industry, and Russian intelligentsia and others. Those things include crime and the corruption of many government officials. And it's the travail of millions of people who entrusted their savings to financial scam artists. The proportions of all of these problems are well known to me. But I know also what efforts are required to overcome those difficulties. And yet, we are moving ahead to a more tranquil, normal, dignified life. The foundation has already been laid. With great labor, we managed to achieve cooperation among the President, the government, and Parliament. These are real achievements of the last 2 years. And you must agree, it's necessary to preserve and strengthen that. This cooperation is what helps us to set up our Russian home today, gradually resolve a multitude of problems. And believe it, it won't happen any quicker. Let's try together to preserve, with such an effort, the achieved, still fragile stability and accord in our common home, Russia. Dear fellow citizens, today I particularly want to address those who have not yet made their choice, those who feel that, as previously, nothing depends on one person as a voter. One can't agree with such feelings. I can't, not as a president nor as a citizen of Russia. I address the young fellow citizens. The older generation didn't have an opportunity to choose its manner of life and thought. This was always decided for us by others, and those who didn't submit had a very difficult time. But now the times are different. You, the young people, have the right to yourselves determine your own fate. But for this, you need to come out to vote. And if you don't do that, your indifference will vote for the days gone by. And you will have to pay for this first, those who are young today. You should not permit the forces of the past to again gain power. You can't permit the country to be returned to those times when each was told how to think, what clothes to wear, and how to comb your hair, and what songs to sing. How can one not remember the famous statement that which we have we don't cherish, and when we lose it, we weep? It's the same with freedom. It's like air. When you have it, you don't notice it. But the absence of it will be felt immediately. Today, life itself insistently asks each young person, what kind of Russia do you want for yourself and for your children? I don't believe that you're indifferent to that. And that is why I ask you to go to the polling stations, come together with your friends, and vote yourselves. Vote for yourselves. Ahead of you is an entire life, and I want very much that it would develop into a happier one than it did for our generation. I address my peers, people of middle and older age, and I ask you, when you vote, remember your mother and your father. Remember your childhood and your youth. How much anxiety did our parents have to live through? How many dangers did they preserve us from, protected us? And thanks to them, we remember mostly good things from the past. But what a difficult life did they themselves live, because they didn't know from books what real hunger is, what real fear is, what massive repressions are. Do we want this for our grandchildren? Let your wisdom reveal to you the correct choice. I recently learned that the word candidate means a person who is dressed in white. In ancient Rome, those who contended for a state position wore white clothing, because the color white is a symbol of purity of thought. You will have to assess how pure and how honest are those who are striving to be elected deputies, how professional they are, how wise they are, and how capable they are of strengthening stability and accord in Russia. You will have to decide whom to trust among them and whom not to trust. Many people's emotions are at a boiling point now, but may God preserve us from succumbing to fleeting moods because of impetuousness. Go and vote to spite someone, and then again to seek the culprits in all our troubles. And so it happened that in our country, the president has to answer for everything. And you, my respected fellow citizens, judge me very sternly, at times even mercilessly. But on the 17th of December, you will have to make the decision. And it will be just if on that day, with equal strictness, each one asks himself, in your hands lies the fate of Russia. We were airing the address of the President Boris Yeltsin to Russian voters. We continue our broadcast. We've already reported that today, live on the air, on the program View, there should have been a pre-election television debate of the leaders of two political blocs, Gennady Zyuganov and Yegor Gaidar. But the leader of the CPRF refused the debates. Instead of him, the deputy of the Duma from the Communist Party, the attorney Yuri Ivanov, will participate. Mr. Gaidar, why did Mr. Zyuganov suddenly refuse to meet with you on the air, concluding the election campaign on public Russian television? Probably he must have fallen ill. We are not strangers at all. We represent two political forces, and I'm prepared to hold discussion with the person authorized for that by the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Two clear political forces in Russia. The Communist Party of the Russian Federation has a clear ideology which is hopelessly obsolete, leading the country into an abyss, and that's understood. And Democratic Choice of Russia with a clear liberal ideology. Now Russia is selecting its path. I think it's very beneficial for television viewers to hear our arguments in their presence. Lately you have said that your movement and you personally are in a risk zone. How are things now? The last days indicated that we're going to meet the requirements. The 17th of December, simultaneously with the elections of the State Duma, the elections of the highest organs of representative and executive rule will be held in 15 subjects of the Federation. Interfax was told in the Central Election Commission. In 6 subjects there will be various referendums, and in 13 regions there will be elections Commission of Elections of Administration heads. The impression is gained that Russia is preparing for elections of a government and not a parliament. Commenting on the criticism against the cabinet of ministers was the head of the pre-election campaign of the bloc Our Home is Russia, Sergei Belayev. No matter what the election results are, a radical change won't occur in the course of the Chernomyrdian government, even if the absolute majority will go to the communists, although Belayev feels such a result is impossible. The communists themselves will consider the election successful if in all the districts they gain more votes than they did in 1993. For the sake of the unity of the National Patriotic Forces, the Communist Party sacrificed its candidates in 63 districts. This was stated today by Gennady Zyuganov. According to him, 100,000 representatives of the CPRF will participate in control over the course of elections throughout the country. Vladimir Zhirinovsky feels that there will be no centralized falsification of the election results except for minor squabbles at the level of district administration. However, the leader of the LDPR did advise European observers to be more attentive. Today, in an obstetrical unit of one of the Moscow hospitals, gifts were given to newborn babies, books and cassettes with speeches of the leader. The children will grow up and gifts will remind them in what a crucial time for the homeland they were born, it says in the statement of the press service of the LDPR. Politicians evidently will charm the electorate to the last moment. Many voters have already made their final choice. More than 1,500 residents of the Primoryan Rim area voted early. Basically, these are seamen who on the 17th of December will be far from their homeland and its political problems. In Omsk, the elections are triple. They must elect a mayor, a governor, and of course deputies of the State Duma. In order to print the voting ballots, the lists and the protocols for just the Omsk district, 100 tons of paper was needed. It's time to think about the environment. In the international ecological organization Greenpeace polled the basic pre-election amalgamations. The topic is concrete environmental problems of Russia. In the opinion of experts of Greenpeace, not a single bloc has a serious environmental program. The most interesting thing is that that also applies to the environmental movement KEDR. Greenpeace announced it's impermissible to use its name in the KEDR advertising campaign. Konstantin Tachilin, Public Russian Television. As of tomorrow, only the pre-election posters will serve as orientation for those who haven't yet decided on who to vote for. In the last month, citizens of Russia were given a chance to understand the code system where each number corresponds to a particular symbol and lifestyle. Last week, the basic attention of the campaigners was devoted to the elderly people, but during this last week, they spared no effort or time to convert the youth to their ranks. But in the majority of cases, the choice will be made not on the basis of knowledge of the pre-election platform, but emotions evoked by the leader. I had many advisors regarding changing my image, and regarding, I was told to acquire more firmness, but I know that in my personality there is the fundamental key Russian profound quality, which can't be rooted out of me or knocked out by one charge. Demonstrating their lifestyle and spreading their wings were the falcons of Zhirinovsky during visits to nightclubs. Clothing, simplicity are the same thing, less ties and all these different pins. Each is trying to stand out. Yes, they do try to stand out, but not in the sense of chic or expensive fabric or design, but they stand out in style. An accent was made in the wardrobe of the youth were the blue caps of the Our Home is Russia, obviously more practical than pre-election posters. A serious change was undergone by the style of Konstantin Borovoi, previously associated with the program Comme il faut for the New Russians, and now directing his gaze in the direction of the Russian slapstick theater. Incidentally, the puppets and plays, according to Konstantin Natanovich, were prepared long before the beginning of the pre-election campaign. And those who haven't got particular imagination filled mailboxes of citizens with Russian carbon copies of the agreement with the nation, which were very popular in pre-election campaigns in the West a few years ago. Lana Garbunova, Public Russian Television. The second day has ended of the early elections in Chechnya. Overall, they are being conducted successfully. This was stated by the presidential representative in Chechnya, Lech Lobov. In an interview to a correspondent of Interfox over the telephone from Grozny, he said the percentage of voters will differ according to regions in Chechnya, but overall through the Republic, as the Election Commission feels, the 25% requirement necessary to recognize the elections valid is already surpassed. Such an activity of the population at the elections in Chechnya wasn't expected by anyone, even the biggest optimists, despite intimidation and terrorist acts, despite the fact that polling stations close the minute dusk begins to fall, and people often have to walk many kilometers to attend the polling stations. In Grozny, already 38% of the electorate has already voted in the Naterich, Naursk, Achhoy-Martan regions from 25 to 30%, and in the Urus-Martan area even 50%. As was stated in the Central Election Commission, in almost all regions of the Republic, voting is underway. There is voting even underway in the Ukhtukalinsk region, which is under the control of the Dudaev armed formations. Today, at the urgent government session, immediately upon the arrival of Dokuzovgaev from Moscow to Grozny, it was noted that these elections will help to stabilize the political situation in the Republic, and with them, the process of normalization begins, and also a life of building. Sergei Melchenko, Alexander Letichevsky, Mikhail Sotnikov, Public Russian Television from the Chechen Republic. In connection with the gunmen's attempts to impede the elections in Chechnya, the situation in the Republic overall remains tense. Information which is received by us from Chechnya, specifically from Gudermes, is quite contradictory. Just now, our special correspondent, Alexander Garyanov, returned from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, where he attempted to clarify certain questions regarding the situation in Chechnya with the minister, Anatoly Kulikov. Anatoly Kulikov confirmed that in the last days the situation in Chechnya intensified severely. The minister connected that with the elections which began in the Republic, which in his opinion for the Dudaev forces are fatal. Dudaev, the minister confirmed, as of yesterday put into effect the plan called elections. The aim is to disrupt the possibility of the legitimate election of a head of Chechnya. Attempts were made in several regions to infiltrate and to seize, for instance in Urus-Martan today, to seize the ballot boxes. In Urus-Martan at 10 a.m., 45% of the voters had already voted. Gunmen infiltrated. They seized several objects and demanded that the ballot boxes be given to them with the completed ballots. But they were squeezed out of there and warned by the local population and told to leave, otherwise they would resort to force. According to Anatoly Kulikov, in several places, fistfights and shootings even occurred. Despite all the complexities, elections are underway, and there are even suppositions that today, for instance, they will be completed in the Achhoy-Martan region. The situation in Gudermes, the Minister of Internal Affairs described as follows. Well in advance, small groups had infiltrated that area, and between 500 to 600 gunmen had concentrated from the three largest gangs, including the Geliskhanov gang. Yesterday at 4:30, they seized the hospital, attempted to blockade the regional division, and did blockade the division of the militia and the commandant's office and the railway terminal. At 1400 hours, as of today, the militia compound was deblockaded. The militia is already working with the troops there. But the saddest thing is that we sustained casualties there. Anatoly Kulikov stated that the internal forces had 22 casualties and 41 wounded personnel. There are casualties among the Ministry of Defense subdivisions. 10 soldiers died. To the question, why did the federal forces not deploy aviation, Anatoly Kulikov responded, yes, we could have done that, deployed the front aviation and strike. But can you imagine how many casualties that would have caused? And elections, the use of aviation and casualties among the population are not compatible. According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, gunmen were dealt a powerful blow. Around 100 people were annihilated, and the rest of them are tightly encircled. The gunmen several times attempted to break the circle and pull up additional forces. However, these attempts were not successful. According to Anatoly Kulikov, the result of the elections in Chechnya will, in the near future, affect the development of the situation in Gudermes as well. In Moscow today, pursuant to the decree of the President, journalists who worked under combat conditions in Chechnya and Budyonnovsk received state awards of Russia. The head of the administration of the President of Russia, Sergei Filatov, who bestowed the awards, said in his congratulatory message that the journalistic profession is a brave one, and Russian journalists did everything to give an honest account of the Chechen War. The Order for Valor was awarded to Yelena Lorye, Komsomolskaya Pravda, and Alexander Ryabushev, the newspaper Russian Vesti. 20 more reporters, photo agents, and cameramen were honored with the medal Order for Meritorious Service to the Homeland of the Second Degree for coverage of the Chechen and Budyonovsk events. Among them were representatives of the television company Public Russian Television, the deputy editor-in-chief of ITA, Viktor Kuznetsov, correspondent Dmitry Motrich, and cameraman Oleg Nikiforov. Awarded were also the personal correspondents of various sources of mass media who worked in Chechnya, including the field correspondent of the program Time, Grigory Brinza, Rudolf Ushanov, and Nikolai Shibalkov. In expressing gratitude for the awards, journalists expressed reciprocal wishes to receive no more awards for covering war. Lada Shubina, Evgeny Shmatrikov, Public Russian Television. Speaking about the results of the economic policies of the government in 1995, at the press conference today was the first Vice Premier, Anatoly Chubais. Today I received reporting data for the 2 weeks of December. On inflation, the data is unprecedented. There was no such thing in the country for many years. Based on the data, I'll risk to predict that December inflation in Russia will be not only less than 4%, but it will be definitely less than 3.5%. Despite the successful battle with inflation, Anatoly Chubais does not wish to paint a picture of economic achievements in one color. It's still quite intense as the non-payment problem. In November, the situation returned to January indicators, but the Vice Premier's confidence that next year will be the first year of economic growth in Russia is because of the opposition of even the opponents of the government don't argue with the increased financial resources of the country, the stalled industrial decline, and the narrowed gap between the rich and poor. Also, Chubais won't accept speculation about citizens living below poverty level in the country. Their number was very high in the beginning of the year. However, later, beginning in March of 1995, every month in the country, consecutively, the number of citizens declined living below poverty level. The reason is the same, the decrease in inflationary tempos, and there is proof that 1% in the decrease of inflation per month is equivalent to 700,000 people who are pulled out from below the poverty level in the country. As a result, in November of this year, the number of citizens living below poverty level in the country fell to under the mark of 30 million people. Nikolai Ivanov, Alexander Ovshar of Public Russian Television. Anatoly Chubais also stated that today, for the first time in the country, depositors who were victimized in Volgograd received compensation from the funds of the Russian House Selinga. This is a real response of the government to accusations of making populist promises, presumes the first Vice Premier. The Volgogradian clients of the Russian House Selinga today began to receive their money. Of course, not all, but only those needy or in need, invalids or pensioners who accumulated dividends to the sum of less than 1 million rubles. Such decision was adopted by the Council of Stockholders of the Russian House Selinga. This was possible because of cooperation between the RHS and the Federal Commission on Securities. The President and the Premier both stated that it's necessary to find a solution to the situation when many citizens lost their money because of dishonest financial companies. And how are these instructions being fulfilled? We work in several directions at the same time. The first, while assessing the company, divide companies into two groups. Companies who have property, have a desire to work honestly and fulfill their obligations before depositors, and those companies that don't do that and are obvious swindlers. Regarding the companies who want to work well and properly and fulfill their obligations, there are such companies, for instance, the Russian House Selinga, which is really demonstrating goodwill currently toward the government, and also its depositors is beginning to open up its assets. We already have been there and done an appraisal to more than 100 billion rubles, the appraisal of fixed assets of different objects. Recently, we completed an appraisal of a large number of planes which belong to that firm, which will be conveyed to a deposit in the common fund. That companies should continue to work and comply with their obligations before citizens. What regards the scam companies, the President and the Premier also indicated the solution for that problem. In this case, there must be appropriate action taken with arrested or seized assets. These companies must be liquidated most strictly, arrest the assets and put them under public control. In that case, a public and state compensation fund is set up which is going to control those assets and manage the assets in the interest of depositors, and then later make compensation payments to depositors who have lost the money as a result of dishonest firms. On the basis of decisions undertaken by the Guardian Council of the funds, and the government will also support a little through money from privatization. A percentage of monetary privatization will be deposited to this public state fund. Depositors of what financial companies may count on the return of their deposits in the near future. It's difficult to answer that question now. I can only speak after I've conducted an appraisal of the assets and have seen the balance sheets of the company and see what it really exists. When we undertook the Russian House Selinga, we saw that they do have assets. In principle, therefore, offshore assets also exist for Hapior Invest and the company Russian Fixed Assets. At the automated conveyors launched today in the Nizhegorодsk joint stock company GAS, a new domestic automobile, GAS 2705, was born, created on the base of the 1.5-ton pickup Gazil. At the celebrations on the occasion of the opening of the new production, the chairman of the government, Viktor Chernomyrdin, was present. 1.5 years ago, during the first visit to the Gorky auto plant in Novorossiysk, the head of the government promised to come here on days of major events for the company, and then the plant workers said that the suitable day for the next meeting will be in the end of 1995. With the Prime Minister, they fulfilled their promise. Today, mass production begins of 4 modifications of the family of Gazils. In essence, a new assembly facility was created with conveyor belts of a length of 2.5 kilometers long, with robotic complexes developed and produced by lathe-producing services of the automobile plant itself. That's what we need today. That's what Russia needs, the country needs. And that's now, not as more than ever before. This will probably always exist, but today we really need it. I must say that the circumstances are not easy in the country, and they're far from easy. I understand how much today is being done by the administration of the district and the plant especially, and it was not an easy accomplishment for them, but it's very necessary. Much of what is assimilated and applied here has no comparison in domestic automobile manufacturing, and Gazils, they promise here, will meet world standards, the Nizhegorодsk governor hinted to the Prime Minister. I think if Viktor Stepanovich buys a 6-passenger Gazil, then our problems at the auto plant will be solved automatically. We don't need any hands out or anything. The main thing is customers. Long ago I had said that the automobile with the doubled interior cabin space, 6-passenger vehicle, I will absolutely buy that car. I love that automobile. In essence, it's a family car. My childhood was spent on a 1.5-ton truck. My father was a driver. And as far as I can remember, I always drove that type of a vehicle. So for me, it's very dear, and I'll do it with pleasure. And of course, availing themselves of the last day permitted for campaigning, journalists asked how the Prime Minister assesses his own pre-election marathon. If you're speaking of our home, about our movement, I'm convinced that we will be represented in the State Duma. I'm convinced that each Russian will vote for our home and for their home, And I want that very much. I think that many will do that. It is our home. It is our very own home, tomorrow's home. Natalia Chernishova, Alexander Tsirulnikov, Arkady Tsirulnikov, Yuri Pichinkin, Public Russian Television from Nizhny Novgorod. Exactly 2 years ago, the Automobile Pan-Russian Alliance began a public issue of its stock. Coinciding with this event was the press conference by the director of the alliance. It was presumed that the collected money would be put into the production of a domestic car on the base of the Volga auto plant. The project was intended for 300,000 microliter vehicles per year, affordable for all Russians. For all the shareholders, that could have realized solid revenues and given an impulse to the domestic economy. We had initially super global plans to build an auto assembly plant, which would be like the prefiguration of a new development of automobile industry for Russia. But we couldn't raise the necessary funds. Our arguments turned out not to be very convincing. But the project did not fail, and it didn't fail mostly because, again, of the mental state of our society, which believes that in Russia one may realize major industrial projects. Faithful to obligations before depositors, the Automobile Alliance began the realization of so-called small projects. Recently, an agreement was signed on the assembly in Finland of 60,000 Volga automobiles, which will be sold in the market under the brand Evro Samara. What's interesting for AvtoVAZ, we are going to receive additional jobs in the first place because all of these 60,000 are calculated over the span of 3 years, and this is over and above the industrial yield program of our vehicles annually. Not only do we get new jobs, but all our suppliers and middlemen do. And secondly, we're interested in strengthening our positions in Europe by assembling the Evrolada car, which already has been qualified as the car of European assembly. According to calculations of economists of the alliance, profits should double expenses for the project, which could yield 20% per year for every share of the Automobile Alliance. As we learned, the government of Russia has developed a resolution to protect the information expense of the country. That document provides for serious restrictions on the participation of foreign capital in Russian television companies. To partially or completely keep the Russian peacekeeping contingent in Sarajevo is proposed by the leadership of the UN mission in former Yugoslavia. One of the documents of the mission, to which an ITER-TASS correspondent gained access to today, contains a recommendation to leave in the Bosnian capital the entire Russian battalion, two or one of its companies. As is known, pursuant to the previously developed plans, the Russian battalion was to have left Sarajevo, while in the region of the Pasansk corridor in the northern part of Bosnia, the Russian Peace Brigade of 1,500 military servicemen would be brought in. The signing of the ELSA agreement, mutual recognition between Yugoslavia and Bosnia, as the final entrenching of guarantees of future peace with satisfaction was received by residents and almost all the political forces in the republics of the former Federation. However, a difficult path to peace will probably last for years. The fate of the Paris agreements themselves, literally hours before their signing, was under grave doubt because of the uncertainty over the schedule for the return of French pilots whose planes were shot down by the Bosnian Serbs. As became clear, the decisive role in this action was played by representatives of the Russian military attaché and employees of the Russian Special Services, the FSB, and foreign intelligence. The commander of the Army of the Serb Republic, Colonel General Ratko Mladic, expressed great gratitude to Russia for help in resolving that crisis. With full support for the peace agreements, General Mladic expressed general concern of the Bosnian Serbs that the peace process may be derailed because of not resolving the status of the Serbian Sarajevo and access to the sea in the Pasansk corridor. Today in the Republic of the Bosnian Serbs, the state of war was abolished, but it will continue only in the areas of Serb Sarajevo. Residents of Bosnia-Herzegovina await the beginning of history's largest ground operation of NATO. By the end of the week, the UN Blue Helmets will transfer their powers to the international force on implementing the peace agreement. Vladimir Solovyov, Anatoly Klyan, Public Russian Television, Bosnia, Yugoslavia. Today in Spain, the session of the European Council convened with the heads of states and governments of the European Union countries. Particularly singled out in the agenda is cooperation with the Russian Federation to be discussed considering the possible results of parliamentary elections in our country. With a heavy snowfall, which was not seen here in 4 years, Madrid greeted the heads of states and governments of 15 European countries, which comprise the European Union. The main question which they are going to discuss is the introduction of a common European currency. Evidently, it will be called the euro. Although it must be noted that the criteria of the new monetary denomination are met only by 4 countries, the attempt to even out social economic indicators on the path to introduction of new currency led to an outburst of worker activity. Social upheavals of late in France and the possibility of their spread to other countries have forced the heads of the states, countries of the European Union to seriously undertake the problem of employment and social protection for the population. The patience of 18 million unemployed in the most flourishing countries of Europe are on the brink, and they don't intend to further tighten their belts because of the economic changes to benefit the strategy of the European Union. Included in the discussion of the Madrid conference is the report of the Ministry of Labour and Finances, which in the event of endorsement must be receive the support of the unions. In the agenda of the session is also the broadening of the union as well. Notices for acceptance were submitted by 12 countries, 10 of which are countries of the former socialist community. But the decision of the accepting new members into the European Union is a matter for the future. Vladimir Grigoriev, Vladimir Ivanov from Madrid for Public Russian Television. Today, after 3 weeks of strike in France, the first trains moved. The large protest movement forced the government into serious concessions. It has rejected the lifting of the special pension payment system in several segments of the federal civil sector and other measures as well. Today, in the capital of Thailand, history's first meeting ended of the leaders of the 10 countries of Southeastern Asia, where the region was declared to be a zone free from nuclear weapons. In the capital of Thailand today, the 5th meeting adjourned of the heads of states and governments of the ASEAN members. The Bangkok summit is unique. For the first time participating in it was the Prime Minister of Vietnam, a country which just recently became a full-fledged 7th member of the association. In Bangkok, for the first time, leaders of ASEAN convened Cambodia, Laos. Essentially, the first step was made to the formation of a commonwealth of all 10 countries in Southeastern Asia. Their heads today signed an agreement on creating a non-nuclear zone known in the region. It provides for a ban on the development, production, and storage of nuclear weapons. The effectiveness of the agreement obviously depends on the position of nuclear nations. Two of them, the United States and China, have announced their objections, as it is presumed here, without basis. In Bangkok, several agreements were signed to activate trade economic cooperation, specifically in the area of energy, broadening the sphere of trade conferences and protection of intellectual property. In the Bangkok Declaration, paths and ways were indicated for the development of Asian countries to the end of the century. Results of the Bangkok summit indicate the expedited integration of ASEAN countries and turning the association into an influential force in the Asian-Pacific region. Russia, it says in the message of Boris Yeltsin, is interested in productive dialogue with the ASEAN countries. Now practical steps must be made. Alexander Vinodin, Gennady Slavchik, Public Russian Television from Bangkok. Throngs of residents of Nablus, the largest Arab city on the western bank of the Jordan River, greeted the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat, who arrived today in the city for the first time in 28 years. This is the third city which will be conveyed under the control of the authorities of the Palestinian autonomy pursuant to the agreements between Israel and the PLO. St. Petersburg. Today in the Dzerzhinsky Regional People's Court, coming to its logical conclusion, was the trial of the terrorist act in July when a maniac terrorist threatening to cause an explosion near the city wedding hall seized a bridal party's Mercedes with newlyweds. Then, instead of the newlyweds voluntarily offering themselves as hostage to the terrorist with the deputy of the State Duma, Alexander Nevzorov, and the deputy head of the regional police, Vladimir Kolesnik, the terrorist agreed to the replacement, which was a big mistake. The terrorists, the hostages, lured the terrorist out of the city and disarmed him with the special squads and subdivisions of the FSB. The terrorist, Simon Wickler, was not produced in the court because his maniacal state deteriorated to the point of incoherence. We need not to try him, but to treat him, and as soon as possible. But because there was no harm done, and I was a voluntary hostage, I ask, therefore, that the court have mercy on him, because he's wretched. And so it was. The court determined that a special psychiatric hospital should be his place of incarceration under strict surveillance indefinitely. But if Wickler will be convincing in his recovery, he again might take up Mercedes from wedding parties, but for Alexander Nevzorov, there will be a new possibility to play the hero. Our film crew just returned from the press conference given by Alla Pugacheva, where the singer presented her new compact disc and answered the journalists' questions. Pugacheva took a time out, 1.5 years of silence. That time is what she needed to catch her breath, look around and think, and to get involved in her theater of song, about which much was said at length. This, she stated just now at a press conference in the Metropole Hotel, where she arrived immediately from the airport. Just 2 hours ago, our legend, Alla, strolled through Petersburg. Her recent CD, Don't Hurt Me People, she said here, was her last and very favorite. But it seems that it's not a goodbye yet. She gave hope to those here with a future encounter somehow later. But the hot topic of the day she presented as follows. I like to participate in matters in which I understand something, but here I'm not very competent. But what regards whether I will vote, I will vote. Because we have to, and I feel that this time we have to go and vote, at least for the sake of knowing the mood in our society. I don't know whether our politicians and ruling body need this, but I think that we need it, and it will be interesting, and I will vote. I vote, and I hope that my families will share with me, because we can only choose one person. We've selected 3 contenders. They are Yavlinsky from the group Yabloko, Gaidar, and Chernomyrdin. I can say why, because I know Chernomyrdin. This is a very capable, strong manager, a stable man with a strong, honorable mind. And he doesn't speak idly. Gaidar has been, as you know, given the nickname Smart One, and such a nickname isn't given to fools. And Yavlinsky, I feel, of all the politicians, he is the most sober-minded one and deep theoretician. In a moment, the program will be continued with the sports news. With this, I bid you farewell. Goodbye. Channel 1, the overview of the sports events. Good evening. I'll begin the broadcast with information for basketball fans. Yesterday, the matches were played in the sixth round of the Club Championship of Europe. Our attention is obviously glued to the Army team of the capital. Muscovites played a very strong second half of the match, with the Turkish Weker winning 81-71. 39 points were gained by Julius Nos and Bundros Vetra. Away from home, the Italian Benetton and German Bayer held victories. In the tournament table, there's triarchy, 10 points each for the Greek Olympiakos, Benetton and CSKA. Behind the leaders are the French Antibes and Bayer. 3 matches were played in Group B. The most dramatic one was in the capital of Israel, Macedonia. The Croats, after the first time, were ahead by 11 points. However, later the aggressive flair of the guests vanished and the Israelis win 78-75, scoring the decisive basket at the last second of basic time. You can watch that throw in our clip of the day at the end of the program. Panathinaikos beats the Italian Ventus and heads the tournament table. In second place is Maccabi. At the World Women's Handball Championships, the semi-finalists are known as. Unfortunately, the Russian team is not among the top 4. Yesterday, our team lost to the hosts 18-23. Today, the Danes will play the Korean team, and the Hungarian team will play the Norwegian team. The soccer page of the broadcast, new details in the Anopko case. I'll remind you the Spartak captain decided to go to Spain before the quarterfinals of the European Championships. The arbitration committee of FIFA, having reviewed today the suit between Aviera and the Madrid Atletico, has reached a unanimous verdict. Anopka belongs to Aviera. That was information from Etertas Sport. Bosman continues to disturb Europe. The European Judiciary Chamber today adopted an unprecedented decision on the suit of the Belgian soccer player, revoking the years-old rules on the transfer of professional players, restricting the number of legionaries on the field. Evidently, a soccer revolution is to come. The champion of Brazil will be known on Sunday after the second final match between Botafogo and Santos. The first, Botafogo, wins 2-1. The final score was scored by the Brazilian forward Tulio, managing just in time to break the time after playing a corner ball. At any time of the year, hockey and soccer are inseparable. Today in Moscow, a press conference was held dedicated to the traditional Izvestia tournament, which starts tomorrow. Journalists were told that all of the teams would put out their best players, except for the Finns, which have organized at home an alternative competition. Further, tickets for the match with the Russians are sold out. Interest in hockey in the capital is returning. On the slopes of the Austrian St. Antonio, after almost a 2-year silence, the German Katja Zeitzinger wins the speed descent today. Our Varvara Zielinska, who in the first attempt only came in 26th, managed to collect herself and finally took 11th place. In Vietplan, the freestyle masters competed in acrobatics. Among the men, there was no equal to the fantastic technique of the Frenchman Alex Blanc. In the women's tournament, the viewers and judges were charmed by the leader of the world season, Coletta Brandt from Switzerland, and we will note the very promising Natalia Ryechova. Today she took 3rd place, and in the overall count of the World Championship, she's in 2nd position. 2 events in 1 match of the National Hockey League. The first, the leader of the championship, Florida, loses to Boston 4-6. In the second, the left wing player, Adam Oates, scored 4 times into the Panthers' net. He's done that for the first time in his career. Philadelphia, without particular problems, defeats Tampa 4-0. If it's Lindros, Leclerc, Remberg, the Flyers can't be stopped. This trio has 3 goals to its credit. The Thursday match was marked by a grand tussle in which almost all the hockey players took part. 2 goals of Herman Sitov did not bring his Calgary victory over St. Louis, a tie 3-3. A new world record was established at the short lanes of the pool in Sheffield. The Englishman Mark Foster swam 50 meters butterfly style in 23.45 seconds, improving his own previous accomplishment by 1/10 of a second. That was the overview of the sports events on Channel 1. As we had promised you in our traditional video segment, a miraculous throw, which brought Maccabi victory over Sabona in the World Club Basketball Championships in Europe. Goodbye.